This is a tutorial for homework 1, 2D animation. This will be short and sweet, hopefully, just to set you up so you can do your illustration or drawing or tracing of the New York City street scene, preferably a photo that you took yourself. Could be your neighborhood or the area around Marymount, wherever you want to take the photo. Once again, we're working in Adobe Animate. Your intro screen is going to look a little different in the classroom. There are some issues with updating to the newest version of Adobe Animate in the computer labs at Marymount that we'll have to discuss. But make sure you start out with ActionScript 3 document, whatever the default size is. For now is fine. So once again, the challenge here is to use some of the drawing tools that we went over the first class, primarily using simple shapes and deforming them and building onto simple shapes in a way that will create some kind of particularized or some kind of interpretation of the photographic source material without necessarily being too naturalistic or too literal. So here's how to do it to get you set up. First off, once you have your stage set up, import the photograph, import to stage, and I have this somewhere. Yeah, no, I put it. It's always a hunt. There we are. There it is. Okay. If your image is too large, no worries. You can always shrink it down with your free transform tool. It's Q on the keyboard, and grabbing the corner like this will allow you to shrink it down. If you hold shift, it'll maintain the proportions. You can either trace directly on top of your image, or put it off to the side and copy it. And what we're doing here, and I'm zooming by hitting Command plus, Command minus. You can also zoom in and out with the magnifying glass, the zoom tool. Zoom in, and then hit Option to zoom out. We have these two things. You can also change this percentage here. If you're zoomed in and you want to move around, remember the hand will allow you to do that. That's going to pay off quite a bit as you're illustrating this thing. Once you have the image placed, it doesn't have to be perfect for this exercise, but you more or less want it to fill your stage. Anything that's overlapping won't come out in the final export or the final animation, so be aware of that. So now this is going to appear automatically in what the default layer 1. We'll talk more about layers later on. The layers appear in this timeline panel, which is responsible for everything we do in terms of the passage of time, this being an animation course. But what you want to do first, once you've placed this, is just lock it by clicking on the little dot next, on the layer to the right of the layer name, underneath this little lock symbol, and that'll lock your layer. Notice that clicking on the dot underneath the eyeball symbol will turn off the visibility. So there's a couple things that we'll be able to play with later on. But then what you want to do, you're going to see these icons at the bottom of your timeline if you're working in the classroom. But the icon will be the same, new layer, create a new layer, and now you'll be able to draw on top of the picture. And so I'm going to start off with my rectangle tool, choosing some colors. Now the colors you pick, can be picked with a color picker like that, They can also be, if you click on the color picker like this, you can source colors with your eyedropper. So if you want to be a little bit more naturalistic, I'm going to change this color by clicking and then clicking on the fill color and then actually sampling like that. That's a really quick way to source my color. And so I can just build via shapes. What if I try to do something like this? No, that's not too bad. And then I can select parts, change the fill color. Oops. If I change the stroke on this to that color, I could do that. And then if a straight-on photograph like this will make an easier job of trying to conform these simple shapes to the angles and the kind of orientation of objects in your photograph. If you have something in perspective, it'll probably take a little more time, but your workflow should show a range, or your final drawing should show a range of approaches. I'd like to see the inclusion of this kind of distortion of simple shapes with the select tool, like that, and create a simple rectangle and then distort it for these windows. Easy peasy. I'd like to see evidence of maybe some free transform tool, and feel free to, for those details, bring in some paintbrush. Some brush tool as well, and you can zoom in to get those finer details. And you don't have to get every detail. I'm just freehanding this with my trackpad at home. I'm not going to spend time boring you with my workflow, but just take your time, and really, it's an interpretation. It's not perfect literalism. You draw this the way that feels right to you, but start off with it from the simple shapes. Try to be efficient. Try to have a sort of strategy for how you proceed. Plan a couple steps ahead. You can, oops, that's not really what I want to do. You can drag the vertex to get the angle on the pavement here if I wanted to do that. Use your selections. And I could kind of build the pavement this way. I could also, remember, one click selects only the fill here. Double click selects the fill and the stroke. I could use the free transform tool and do some skewing. Maybe, and then only rotate and skew, and I can scale. And that's another way of accomplishing that. Another way to do colors I meant to mention is by clicking on the color panel. You can kind of go around and do some color picking and that kind of thing. This gives you a wider range, and this is a kind of panel that remains in place rather than popping up and disappearing at every moment. There's also swatches. You can save colors here. So just a couple things to think about. These are the main points. So just remember the thing about the 2 layers, and then save your project. Often. And I think these are the main points. Eventually, you'll achieve something that you're happy with. Try to more or less cover the entire stage. We don't just want like some linear outlines. We want to try to reproduce the color and the overall feeling of, light and capture the sort of atmosphere of the scene as best you can. So there we go. And you want to end up with something. Let's see, something. something approaching. Import the other one. Something, here's an example of what it might look like. This is simplified. In fact, I didn't even fill in all the areas. If some of it peeks through, that's not the end of the world. So it's not perfect, but it's a representation and interpretation using the language. There's a little bit of gradient. You can kind of play with gradients by exploring the color picker. I'm going on too long here, but here's a gradient. We'll talk about this more in depth later. I'm not going to bore you with this, but you can do fills with gradients if you like. Okay. Email me with any questions. I'll see you next week. We're actually going to animate using these drawings as the background or the kind of context for our first animations. So it should be fun to go forward working with what we've built this week. Take care.